Hello, everybody. My name is Andy Collins. I'm head of security at Node 4. We're really going to be discussing the move by most organisations to home working. Joined with me today, I've got Martin and Vicky from our security and compliance teams. And I guess there's a few points that we wanted to sort of cover off as part of this video today. I guess firstly, we all know that a lot of organisations have had to move to home working as part of obviously the recent pandemic that's been taking place, and in addition to that, I guess there's some subsequent benefits to employees now being allowed to remotely work with organisations. However, that naturally brings some security and compliance challenges with it. I guess touching on that, probably a question for Martin. I guess where are we seeing the inherent challenges with employees moving to a distributed model of working, rather than having centralized access to the network?
So one of the challenges is for organizations where they've historically focused on their network perimeter as their main security boundary. And as soon as everyone's outside of that perimeter, traffic's maybe not going through firewalls, and that behavior isn't all happening on site. Suddenly a lot of organizations have lost visibility of what employees are doing and what devices are doing, because they're no longer on their network directly. So the focus has moved a lot of the time from networks and perimeters to endpoints, and SaaS and cloud platforms as well, that a lot of people have started using more.
And Vicky, do you think there's potentially some compliance challenges that comes with allowing users to work from home? Do you think there's any considerations that organizations need to be addressing?
I think from just a general security aspect, like Martin just said, the endpoints and being able to monitor what end users what they're actually doing on their devices is a good starting point. I think it's really important from a control aspect, from a compliance aspect, that only employees can get onto systems that they need access to, and having validity and the right level of access to those systems reduces the risk of information and commercial data or personal information being breached in some way, because you're reducing the access to those systems at that endpoint use. So I think the onus is around the access control of those systems themselves. But then that brings on a really interesting question, I think, around, well, how do you validate the systems that are used, but also when working from home, the different technologies available for employees to use, the different platforms, from, I don't know, using project management tools to using different collaboration tools. What is it that companies want to use, and have they actually mandated kind of those different security aspects of using those different tools for their organization? So it throws up a lot of different questions around, how you control the systems employees use, full stop.
And I suppose that raises quite a good point in some respects, because a number of these organizations will have made these changes in an emergency state where they haven't historically been geared up to do home working. Do you think there's to sort of do that validation, Vicky, do you think there's a need to almost go back and conduct some form of audit into how things have been configured, how things have been managed, and looking at the role-based access of those users as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to break it down structurally from an organisation point of view, that there's two different routes to this. One is looking at, obviously, business continuity planning around how you manage workers moving around sites, but also working now from home. Even though maybe organisations haven't considered what those right tools are, or what their security of endpoint devices are, it's never too late to actually remediate and fix those things. And secondly, so that's business continuity aspect, but secondly, going around the business and understanding what people do in their jobs day to day, their roles and responsibilities, and what access to what systems do they require, and then audit map against that around what level of access. So does that individual need admin access, or do they just need to do administrative tasks in there? I think it's really important that internal compliance or somebody within an organisation has the responsibility to matrix all of that out across all of their employees, because actually what you find is there's probably lots of gaps where there are lots of people maybe in organisations who have access to stuff they shouldn't do. And it's not just their internal systems as well that maybe organisations should focus on. That's just one little bit. Actually knowing that employees can access other platforms and other portals with other information in, which may store their company information in, is just as important as well. So it's gaining that big picture, that 360-degree picture of individuals, of what they're doing within the workplace.
And I suppose that, going back to your point about looking at, some of the plans that are in place, I guess, any sort of incident response plan from a security perspective needs to take into account this shift of working. You raised the point as well about monitoring of employees. Martin, from your perspective, obviously leading Node 4's Security Operations Center, what's the types of I guess good alerts and events that an organization could put in place to, I guess, understand some of the user behavior that distributed working brings?
Yeah, so I guess the key points to look at kind of logging and what data you need, and working out where your critical and sensitive information is. So for a lot of companies, that's going to be moving out of the office in maybe SharePoint and Office 365, perhaps in Salesforce, HubSpot, these sorts of SaaS platforms. So looking at what options are available for taking logs from those. And maybe it's as simple as knowing when an employee is logging in. Maybe it's getting some logs of what data they're looking at and just looking for any anomalies there. So if somebody suddenly starts going through 1,000 customer records in a day, there could be an indication that they're doing something other than their normal job. In terms of the actual endpoints that people are using, it's worth making sure that only corporate devices can access resources, or if people's personal devices are allowed to access them, making sure that there's some visibility there as well. Maybe that's through conditional access policies or VPN clients, so that you've got visibility of what devices are connecting into your network or accessing your resources.
Yeah, and I suppose that also, with that shift of working from a sort of centralized access model, naturally organizations want to be agile in the way that they start to work with third-party platforms that are out there. Now, I know, Vicky, from a compliance perspective, internally within Node 4, we've done a lot of work around, looking at third-party systems that are used, by our workforce. From a distributed working model, is there anything that these organizations should be doing to validate these third-party platforms that these employees may be using unknowingly to the organization, or maybe mandated or could be used by the organization?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that whoever's validating these systems for a business is that they qualify and do some actual supply due diligence on these companies. So basic things that companies should have in place should be things like good security practices and controls. So they might have basic cyber essentials in there, or cyber essentials plus. Then you move on to ISO 27001, and you're looking for businesses that actually have not de-scoped to gain certification as well. And that's a really important point, because a lot of companies have got certifications like ISO 27001 out there, but they have de-scoped they have de-scoped the standard. So actually they're only performing sections or parts of that standard to a certain level. Whereas businesses like Node 4, we're scoped for everything, for all of our services, across every single service tower, for everything that we manage, for every single customer, every single location, for every employee, and every third party that's involved in those managing those services and delivering our services to the customer. So for us, that scope of work and that due diligence is really important, and we will only ever do business with other companies that adhere to the same security controls and protocols that are in place, but also have the same level of control, even at an ISO level. So those certifications are really important. PCI compliance is another one that a lot of businesses are leaning towards, because it's the highest level of security you can have, especially around physical security for data centers where you're hosting data and storing it there. But, you know, that's a really good indication about the level of and the quality of the business that you're doing business with. And again, Node 4 has PCI compliance in place, but due diligence is so important, like understanding how long it takes to go back to business continuity, how long it takes to restore systems should it fail, or how does that third party actually communicate when dealing with an incident. So going back to a security incident, at what point would a customer inform, or what point which the third party or us as a managed service provider inform the customer if there is a security incident, and those things are really important to the end customer.
And what about things like, and again, probably one for Vicky, but how about the importance of, you know, with the advent of Brexit and obviously the data protection regulations, is data sovereignty, you know, looking at where a lot of these platforms are effectively hosted?
So hopefully, fingers crossed, although we're waiting on confirmation from the government and the ICO, we hope that Brexit doesn't actually affect anything to do with GDPR, because GDPR is actually installed into our own legislation. And hopefully that means that we will gain the adequacy decision that we're waiting on from the EU, which means nothing changes, that the EU considered that our data protocols and how we store data, encrypt it, transfer it from one place to another outside of the UK is not affected. I mean, the good thing is for our particular business, we are a UK business. We don't have data centres abroad. A majority of our businesses that we deal with on a day-to-day basis are actually based in the UK. But those that do sit outside of that currently are still protected. And I think what Brexit will do was just force us as customers to actually look at their data protection, and also look at their data protection agreements that they have in place. And it will force customers to look at what data they've got within the systems they actually hold, because unless they know what data they've got, how do they know what they've got to protect? Most customers don't know what is in their data profile within their business, because businesses grow and systems get added on, and then you lose track of it. So I think an audit trail, a data processing audit trail, is a good thing to do.
Okay, no, that's good. And I suppose that sort of segues into, yeah, we know that the data can sprawl into SaaS platforms, and that organizations lose level of control. But Martin, from a security perspective, you know, organizations will have tried to move to get their workforces, you know, I guess, conducting business as usual, process as usual, you know, in very short timescales. How much of a challenge, security challenge, does, you know, bring your own device bring to organizations when, you know, obviously users are maybe using their own home working devices? Are there any tips that we should be providing to organizations to help sort of lock some of those down, or some of the compliance considerations around that?
Yeah, it's definitely a concern, especially as you said, this has been quite a rush process for a lot of customers. So a lot of the time they've got stuff up and running and then worried about security later, rather than kind of building it in from the get-go. So I guess some tips for companies that are having to support bring your own device now. would be to look at what visibility you can get into those devices, but doing so in a way that's not infringing on users' privacy. So whether that's bringing in new tools or using perhaps VDI or whatever platform you're going to be using, just balancing out, having visibility, knowing where your data is, knowing that you're able to remotely wipe that data or at least check what's there, while at the same time not gaining access to the user's personal data. So one really simple thing that I've advised users to do is to create a separate user, a separate profile on their PC or Mac, just to separate out the work and the personal data. And that kind of boundary and putting that corporate data into a separate container can be a really easy way of just ensuring that balance is kept.
Excellent.
And I think it's important to say as well that whatever decisions a company makes to manage that they write that up into some sort of corporate BYOD policy as well, so that users understand what's expected of them and what security might or might not be available on their personal device. So just so they know, for transparency, really. So they know what their obligations are to when they work on behalf of the company.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you both very much for taking the time to speak around, this particular subject. I don't know that we necessarily know whether, organizations will return to a normal level of working, or whether, more of a percentage of each organization's workforce now will be this remote / distributed model, certainly for the foreseeable anyway. But Martin, thank you very much for taking the time to speak around the security aspects, and Vicky, thank you very much for speaking around the compliance aspects.
You're very welcome.